false flags, when you cover them, first of all, it's a tough term to even use, right? Because as soon as you say false flag, we've started conditioning people to see that as conspiratorial. And when anything's conspiratorial, that means it's not true, right? Because if you listen to most media, a conspiracy theorist or conspiracies are all urban legends, right? They're all myths. When in fact, there are many, many conspiracies all throughout American history and world history.
It's not even controversial to say that the United States has used false flag because it's now documented. It's a part of history.
General Smedley Butler wrote a book after World War I that I've read, and I know many of your viewers have as well. War is a racket. And indeed, in many ways it is. And I think that we have noticed over the years that some of the events that led up to war were not accidental.
I found myself going back and looking at World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, everything. Could we have been lied to about everything? And that was my fearful kind of approach to this is that even possible?
I would say they always follow a specific formula of create as much fear and trauma as possible. And then in that traumatization of the public, they're eliciting a specific psychological response. And that response is a cry for protection.
False flags have always been necessary to generate the kind of fear of outsiders or the imagined enemy that governments need in order to support the ridiculous policy of war in the first place.
Stage one is brute force. Stage two is staging something or creating an external enemy so that you then become the rescuer and people do what you say out of sheer fear. And then stage three is really getting to the point where you don't even require enemies any longer, where you can simply convince people through psychological manipulation to do the thing that you want them to do.
(1915). World War I is underway. Britain is at war with Germany. America has not yet joined the conflict. May 7th. A British ocean liner, RMS Lusitania, is on her way from New York to England. Nearly 200 Americans are among the passengers. 2:10 p.m. Off Ireland's southern coast, a torpedo from a German U-boat strikes the Lusitania. More than 1,000 on board lose their lives. On both sides of the Atlantic, the public is told the Germans sank the Lusitania simply to kill women and children. The tragedy fans outrage and moves America closer to declaring war. In propaganda, Germany replaces Spain as the ape.
And because nearly every conflict the U.S. has been involved in the 20th century has been based on a false flag pretext event, and the Lusitania is no different. That's how they got us into World War I. At the time, statesmen, senators, the American people in general wanted to mind their own business. They had a great industrial engine inside the United States. They were able to freely trade throughout the world and had no reason to engage in World War I. It wasn't their business. But unfortunately, the moneyed powers had other interests at hand.
At that point in the war, passenger ships and merchantmen were being armed. They'd been given orders to ram submarines. The submarines had no choice but to fire without warning.
Why did the Germans really sink the Lusitania? Because her hull was loaded with munitions. 6 million rounds of rifle ammunition, over 50 tons of shrapnel shells, and more than 60 tons of military explosives, including aluminum powder and gun cotton. The Lusitania was struck by a single torpedo, followed moments later by a massive explosion. The mighty ship disappeared beneath the waves in just 18 minutes. At the U.S. hearing investigating the incident, a critical piece of evidence went missing. President Woodrow Wilson ordered that the Lusitania's original manifest listing her munitions be hidden in the archives of the U.S. Treasury. Even more significant, evidence the Lusitania was deliberately sent to her doom.
That the Lusitania was hauling munitions to the British that were going to be used against Germany in the war. And so the Germans took it out of the game.
Prior to the incident, Winston Churchill, then head of the British Admiralty, had ordered a study done to determine the political impact if the Germans sank a British passenger ship with Americans on board. President Woodrow Wilson's top advisor, Edward Mandell House, was in England at the time as Wilson's emissary. In the morning, on the day the Lusitania sank, House met with Edward Grey, Britain's foreign minister. House recorded,
"We spoke of the probability of an ocean liner being sunk, and I told him if this were done, a flame of indignation would sweep across America, which would in itself probably carry us into the war."
House and Grey then met with King George V at Buckingham Palace. House wrote,
"We fell to talking strangely enough of the probability of Germany sinking a transatlantic liner. The king said,
'Suppose they should sink the Lusitania, with American passengers on board.'"
That afternoon, the Lusitania was torpedoed. The British Admiralty had been well aware of a U-boat's presence in the South Irish Sea, from decoded intercepts of German naval communications and reports of the sub's activity in that region. Contrary to protocol, no warships were sent to escort the Lusitania, even though 4 destroyers were lying idle in the nearby port of Milford Haven. Commander Joseph Kenworthy, then in British Naval Intelligence, wrote,
"The Lusitania was sent at considerably reduced speed into an area where a U-boat was known to be waiting, and with her escorts withdrawn."
2 leading books in this affair are The Lusitania by British historian Colin Simpson and Room 40 by Patrick Beasley. Beasley, considered the leading authority on the history of British naval intelligence, wrote,
"I am reluctantly driven to the conclusion that there was a conspiracy deliberately to put the Lusitania at risk, in the hopes that even an abortive attack on her would bring the United States into the war."
When the ship was blown up containing American passengers, it became the raison d'entrée into World War I. It was an outrageous and insidious enough event that Americans were reluctantly able to muster themselves and enter the war